progress, it looked both strenuous and clumsy, faintly reminiscent of young elephants at play. One felt that if it were to go on lurching for long enough,
guys,
it would be bound to strip all its
here.
leaves if it did not actually break its stem.
I'm kind of getting started pretty late.
Ungainly though it looked, it was contriving to cover the ground.
I'm doing a cartoon picture of Carl Wetter. Arrow, you know Carl Wetter. Playing on Rocky. The black guy that Rocky had to fight against. Played on The Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh, Happy Gilmore, when he lost his hand.
Admittedly, ours was a good deal smaller, but it did look the same. About 10 minutes after I got home, I was digging around on Griffith, carefully loosening the
I listened to his audio book, but right? Yeah?
Unfortunately, there was an aspect of this self-propelled plant discovery which the newsreel were either not experienced or had chosen
it's all
for some reason
pressure
of their
up.
own not to reveal. There was no warning either. I was bending down, intent on clearing the earth without harming the plant, when something from nowhere hit me one terrific slam and knocked me out. I woke up to find myself in bed, with my mother, my father, and the doctor watching me anxiously. My head felt as if it was split open. I was aching all over, and as I later discovered, one side of my face was decorated with a blotchy red raised wheal. The insistent questions as to how I came to be lying unconscious in the garden were quite useless. I had no faintest idea what it was that had hit me. And some little time passed before I learned that I must have been one of the first persons in England to be stung by a triffid and get away with it. The triffid was, of course, immature. But before I had fully recovered, my father had found out what had undoubtedly happened to me. And by the time I went into the garden again, he had wreaked stern vengeance on our triffid and disposed of the remains on a bonfire. Now that walking plants were established facts, the press lost its former tepidity and bathed them in publicity. So a name had to be found for them. Already there were botanists wallowing after their custom in polysyllabic dog Latin and Greek to produce variants of ambulans and pseudopodia. What the newspapers of the public wanted was something easy on the tongue and not too heavy on the headlines for general use. If you could see the papers,
I like to call him Apollo because, that was his name on Rocky. Apollo, he played Apollo. So let's go and get started.
Tripedals, tripeds, trickets, tripods.
I'm gonna use my marker for this.
Things not even beginning with tree, though almost all centered on the feature of that active three-pronged root. There was argument, public, private, and bar parlour with heated championship of one term or another on near-scientific, quasi-etymological, and a number of other grounds. But gradually one term began to dominate this philological gymkhana. In its first form it was not quite acceptable, but common usage modified the original long first I, and custom quickly wrote in a second F, to leave no doubt about it. And so emerged the standard term. A catchy little name originating in some newspaper office as a handy label for an oddity, but destined one day to be associated with pain, fear, and misery. Triffid. The first wave of public interest soon ebbed away. Triffids were admittedly a bit weird, but that was, after all, just because they were novelties. People had felt the same about novelties of other days, about kangaroos, giant lizards, black swans. And when you came to think of it, were triffids all that much queerer than mudfish, ostriches, tadpoles, and 100 other things? The bat was an animal that had learned to fly. Well, here was a plant that had learned to walk. What of that? But there were features of it to be less casually dismissed. On its origins, the Russians, true to type, lay low and said nothing. Even those who had heard of Umberto did not yet connect him with it. Its sudden appearance, and even more its wide distribution, prompted very puzzled speculation. For though it matured more rapidly in the tropics, specimens in various stages of development were reported from almost any region outside the polar circles and the deserts. People were surprised, and a little disgusted, to learn that the species was carnivorous, and that the flies and other insects caught in the cups were actually digested by the sticky substance there. We in temperate zones were not ignorant of insectivorous plants, but we were custom to find them outside special hothouses, and apt to consider them as in some ways slightly indecent, or at least improper. But actually alarming was the discovery that the wall topping a trivet stem could latch out as a slender stinging weapon 10 feet long, capable of discharging enough poison to kill a man if it struck squarely on his unprotected skin. As soon as this danger was appreciated, there followed a nervous smashing and chopping of triffids everywhere.
So I'm not gonna fill in his mustache or his eyebrows just yet.
Was the removal of the actual stinging weapon.
Okay, so Car is a dark-skinned man, so we have to go about his color differently.
A little later, it began to be a fashion to
And
have a safely docked triffid
we're gonna
or two
still
about
use
one's yard.
yellow, but we're gonna have to use like white and a different color brown.
So that an annual pruning assured that they were in a state of safety where they could provide vast amusement for the children. In temperate countries where man had succeeded in putting most forms of nature save his own under a
So I
reasonable
got this
degree of
Premier
restraint,
color
the
dark
status of the
brown
triffid was
and
thus made quite clear. But in the tropics, particularly in the dense forest areas, they quickly became a scourge.
let me see.
The traveller very easily failed to notice one among the normal bushes and undergrowth, and the moment he was in range, the venomous sting would slash out. Even the regular inhabitant of such a district found it difficult to detect a motionless triffid cunningly lurking beside a jungle path. They were uncannily sensitive to any movement near them, and it was hard to take them unawares.
See how it will look with this Premier, but this not the Premier. This is the Crazy Art yellow
The top off the stem and the sting with it.
and
The jungle natives
white
took to carrying long, light poles mounted with hooked knives,
and the Premier
which they
color
used
dark
effectively if
brown.
they could get their blows in first. But not at all. If the triffid had a
Then now
chance
I'm
to
gonna try
sway
the
forward
white,
and increase its range by an unexpected 4 or 5 feet. Before
yellow,
long, however, these pike-like devices were mostly superseded by spring-operated guns of
and
various
dark
types.
brown.
Most of them shot spinning discs, crosses, or small boomerangs of thin steel. As a rule, they were inaccurate above about 12 yards, though capable of slicing a triffid stem neatly at 25 if they hit it. Their invention pleased both the authorities, who had an almost unanimous distaste for the indiscriminate toting of rifles, and the users, who found the missiles of razor-blade steel far cheaper and
I'm gonna try the Premier color yellow and the dark Premier color dark brown. See how
immense research into the nature, habits, and constitution
and
of the
white.
triffid went on. Earnest
And try
experiments
white,
set out to determine in the interests of science how far
yellow,
and for how long it could walk, whether it could be said
dark
to have a
brown.
front, or could perform its march in any direction with equal clumsiness, what proportion of its time it
So I
spent
think
with
what
its
I'm
roots
gonna
in the
do
ground,
is
what reactions it showed to
see
the presence of
the
various chemicals in the soil, and a vast quantity of other questions, both useful and useless. The
I'm
largest specimen
gonna
ever
use the
observed in the
Premier
tropics
color
stood
white,
nearly 10 feet high.
the Premier color
No
yellow,
European
and the
specimen
Premier
over 8
color
feet
dark
had been
brown.
seen in the average
So I'm gonna put the
of
white
the
on first. Try not to smudge
They
the
appeared
picture
to
when
adapt easily to a
when
wide
doing
range of
so.
climate and soils. They had, it seemed, no natural enemies other than man. But there were a number of not unobvious characteristics which escaped comment for some little time. It was, for instance, quite a while before anyone drew attention to the uncanny accuracy with which they aimed their stings, and that they almost invariably struck for the head. Nor did anyone at first take notice of their habit of lurking near their fallen victims. The reason for that only became clear when it was shown that they fed upon flesh, as well as upon insects. The stinging tendril
Okay,
did
so
not have
now I'm
the
gonna
muscular
get
power
the
to tear firm flesh,
Premier color
but it
yellow.
had strength enough to pull shreds from a decomposing body and lift them to the cup on its stem.
Try not to smudge the
There was
picture
no great
too.
interest either in the 3 little leafless sticks at the base of the stem. There was a light notion that they might have something to do with the reproductive system. That system which tends to be a sort of botanical glory hole for all parts of doubtful purpose until they can be sorted out and more specifically assigned later on. It was assumed, consequently, that their characteristic of suddenly losing their immobility and rattling a rapid tattoo against the main stem was some strange form of Triffidian amatory exuberance. nutritious oil cake for stock feeding. Consequently, Triffids moved into the realm of big business overnight. Right away, I decided my future. I applied to the Arctic and European, where my qualifications got me a job in the production side. My father's disapproval was somewhat qualified by the rate of pay, which was good for my age. But when I spoke enthusiastically of the future, he blew doubtfully through his moustache. He had real faith only in a type of work steadied by long tradition, but he let me have my way. After all, if the thing isn't a success, you'll find out young enough to start in on something more solid, he conceded. There turned out to be no need for that. Before he and my mother were killed together in a holiday Airbus crash 5 years later, they had seen the new companies drive all competing oils off the market, and those of us who had been in at the beginning.
I think I'm going to use this Premier art,
One of the
not
early covers was my
crazy
friend
art,
Walter Luckner.
pumpkin orange on
They
certain
self-doubted
areas.
first about taking Walter on.
So
He knew little of
before I put the
agriculture,
brown in,
less of business. In fact, the qualifications for lab work. On the other hand, he did know a lot about Triffids. He had a kind of inspired knack with them. What happened to Walter that fatal May years later, I do not know. Though I can guess. It is a sad thing that he did not escape. He might have been immensely valuable later on. I don't think anybody really understands Triffids, or ever will. But Walter came nearer to beginning to understand them than any man I have ever known. Or should I say that he was given to intuitive feelings about them? It was a year or two after the job had begun that he first surprised me. The sun was close to setting. We had knocked off for the day and were looking with a sense of satisfaction at 3 new fields and nearly fully grown Triffids. In those days,
okay, so now I'm going to get the Premier color dark brown,
they were arranged across
and I'm going
the
to start
fields
off
roughly in
cutting on
rows.
lightly,
At least the
and
steel
then
stakes to which it fused
build.
together by a chain were in rows.
But
Though the plants
let's
themselves
see.
had no sense of tidy regimentation. We
I'm going to
reckoned
go
that in
and get
another
this
month or so
done.
we'd be able to start tapping them for juice. The evening was peaceful. Almost the only sounds that broke it were the occasional rattling of the Triffids' little sticks against their stems. Walter regarded them with his head slightly on one side. He removed his pipe. Tonight, he observed. I took that as anyone else would, metaphorically.
Okay,
Maybe it's the
so
weather
now
of this
I'm going
visit.
to use the
I
dark
fancy they do it
brown.
more when it's dry.
Try not to smudge the picture
He
with
looked
the
side on
Premier
with a smile.
color pencils will
They
smudge
talk
on
more
you.
when it's dry.
And
Watch.
look like I'm moving the
It
camera.
broke off.
Okay,
You don't really mean you think they're talking, I said,
alright.
noticing his expression. Well, why not? It's absurd, plants talking. So much more absurd than plants walking, he asked. I stared at them, and then back at him. I never thought, I began doubtfully. You try thinking of it a bit and watch it. I'd be interested to hear your conclusions, he said. It was a curious thing that in all my dealings with Triffids, such a possibility had never occurred to me. I'd been prejudiced, I suppose, by the love call theory. But once he had put the idea into my mind, it stuck. I couldn't get away from the fact that they might indeed be rattling out secret messages to one another. Up to then, I fancied I watched Triffids pretty closely. But when Walter was talking about them, I felt that I noticed practically nothing. He could, when he was in the mood, talk on about them for hours, advancing theories that were sometimes wild, and sometimes not impossible. The public had by this time grown out of thinking Triffids freakish. They were clumsily amusing, but not really interesting. The company found them interesting, however. It took the view that their existence was a piece of benevolence for everyone, particularly for itself. Walter shared neither view. At times, listening to him, I began to have some misgivings myself. He had become quite certain that they talked. And that, he argued, means that somewhere in them is intelligence. It can't be seated in a brain because dissection shows nothing like a brain, but that doesn't prove there isn't something that does a brain's job. And there's certainly intelligence there of a kind. Have you noticed that when they attack, they always go for the unprotected parts? Almost always the head, but sometimes the hands. And another thing, if you look at the statistics of casualties, just take note that has been stung across the eyes and blinded. It's remarkable and significant. Of what?
Yeah, dog.
That they know what is the surest way to put a man out of action. In other words, they know what they're doing. Look at it this way. Granted that they do have intelligence, then that would leave us with only one important superiority. Sight. We can see and they can't. Take away our vision, and the superiority is gone. Worse than that, our position becomes inferior to theirs because they are adapted to a sightless existence and we are not. But even if that was so, they can't do things, they can't handle things. There's very little muscular strength in that sting lash, I pointed out. True. But what's the good of our ability to handle things if we can't see what to do with them? Anyway, they don't need to handle things, not the way we do.
Yeah,
They can get their
dog,
nourishment direct
man.
from the soil or from insects and bits of raw meat. They don't have to go through all the complicated business of growing things, distributing them, and they're usually cooking them as well. In fact, if it were a choice for survival between a triffid and a blind man, I know which I'd put my money on. You're assuming equal intelligence, I said. Not at all. I don't need to. I should imagine it's likely to be an altogether different type of intelligence, if only because their needs are so much simpler. Look at the complex processes we have to use to get an assimilable extract from a triffid. Now, reverse that. What does the triffid have to do? Just steal us,
Okay,
wait a few days, and then begin to assimilate us.
I'm gonna use the Premier color white. Go certain areas on him.
He would go on like that by the hour, until listening to him would have me getting things out of proportion, and I'd find myself thinking of the triffids as though they were some kind of competitor. Walter himself never pretended to think otherwise. He admitted, thought of writing a book on that very aspect of the subject when he had gathered more material. And, I repeated, what's stopping you? Just this. He waved his hand to include the farm generally. It's a vested interest now. He wouldn't pay anyone to put out disturbing thoughts about it. Anyway, we have the triffids controlled well enough, so it's an academic point and scarcely worth raising. I never can be quite sure with you, I told him. I'm never certain how far you're serious and how far beyond your facts you allow your imagination to lead you. Do you honestly think there is a danger in the things? He puffed a bit at his pipe before he answered. That's fair enough, he admitted. Because, well, I'm by no means sure myself, but I'm pretty certain of one thing, and that is that there could be danger in them. I'd feel a lot nearer giving you a real answer if I could get a line on what it means when they plateau. Somehow I don't care for that. There they sit with everyone thinking no more of them, and they might be a pretty odd lot of cabbages. Yet half the time they're clattering and cluttering away at one another. Why? What is it they clatter about? That's what I want to know. I think Walter rarely gave a hint of his ideas to anyone else, and I kept them confidential partly because I knew no one who wouldn't be more skeptical than I was myself, and partly because it wouldn't do either of us any good to get a reputation in the firm as crackpots. For a year or so more, we were working fairly close together. But with the opening of new nurseries and the need for studying methods abroad, I began to travel a lot. He gave up field work and went into the research department. It suited him there, doing his own research as well as the company's. I used to drop in to see him from time to time. He was forever making experiments with his triffids, but the results weren't clearing his general ideas as much as he had hoped. He had proved, to his own satisfaction at least, the existence of a well-developed intelligence. And even I had to admit that his results seemed to show something more than instinct. He was still convinced that the pattering of the sticks was a form of communication. For public consumption, he had shown that the sticks were something more, and that a triffid deprived of them gradually deteriorated. He had also established that the infertility rate of triffid seeds was something like 95%. Which, he remarked, is a damn good thing. If they all germinated, there'd soon be standing room only for triffids only on this planet. With that, too, I agreed. Triffid seed time was quite a sight.
I'm gonna use this Premier color red, and I'm gonna slightly go over his face with, and not a lot, just slightly.
When it burst, it did it with a pop that was audible 20 yards away. The white seeds shot into the air like steam and began drifting away on the lightest of breezes. Looking down on a field of triffids late in August, you could well get the idea that some kind of desultory bombardment was in progress. It was Walter's discovery again that the quality of the extracts was improved if the plants retained their stings. In consequence, the practice of docking was discontinued on farms throughout the trade, and we had to wear protective devices when working among the plants. At the time of the accident that had landed me in hospital, I was actually with Walter. We were examining some specimens.
Okay, so now we'll get my
both of us were wearing wire mesh masks.
crazy art
I did not
white
see exactly what happened.
and smooth everything
All I
out
know
with
is that
it.
as I bent forward, a sting slashed viciously at my face and smacked against the wire of the mask. 99 times in 100 it would not have mattered.
Smooth everything
That
out
was what the
with it.
masks were for. But this one came with such force that some of the little poison sacs were burst open, and a few drops from them went into my eyes. Walter got me back into his lab and administered the antidote in a few seconds. It was entirely due to his quick work that they had the chance of saving my sight at all. But even so, it had meant over a week in bed, in the dark. While I lay there, I had quite decided that when and if I had my sight back, I was going to apply for a transfer to another side of the business. And if that did not go through, I'd quit the job altogether. I had built up a considerable resistance to tryphin poison since my first sting in the garden. I could take, and had taken, without very much harm, stings which would have laid an inexperienced man out very cold indeed. But an old saying about a pitcher and a well kept on recurring to me. I was taking my warning. I spent, I remember, a good many of my forcibly dark hours deciding what kind of job I would try for if they would not give me that transfer. Considering what was just around the corner for us all, I could scarcely have found a contemplation more idle. Chapter 3. The Groping City. I left the pub door swinging behind me as I made my way to the corner of the main road. There I hesitated. To the left, through miles of suburban streets, lay the open country. To the right, the west end of London, with the city beyond. I was feeling somewhat restored, but curiously detached now, and rudderless. I had no glimmering of a plan, and in the face of what I had at last begun to
Now,
perceive
before I
as a
go
vast
any
and not merely
further,
local catastrophe,
I'm gonna get the
I was
red
still too stunned
and
to
go
begin to
over
reason
the
one out.
red a little bit more.
What plan could there be to deal with such a thing?
The
I
premier
felt
color
forlorn,
red.
cast into desolation, and yet not quite real, not quite myself, here and now. In no direction was there any traffic nor any sound of it. The only signs of life were a few people here and there cautiously groping their ways along the shop fronts. The day was perfect for early summer. The sun poured down from a deep blue sky set with tufts of white woolly clouds. All of it was clean and fresh, save for a smear made by a single column of greasy smoke coming from somewhere behind the houses to the north. I stood there indecisively for a few minutes. Then I turned east, Londonwards. To this day, I cannot quite say why. Perhaps it was an instinct to seek familiar places, or the feeling that if there were authority anywhere, it must be somewhere in that direction.
And I'm gonna use
The
this
brandy had made me more hungry
toasted
than ever, but I did
toffee,
not find the problem of feeding
crazy
as
art
easy to
toffee,
deal with as it should
toasted
have been.
toffee again too,
And yet, there were the
and go
shops,
over with it.
untenanted and unguarded, with food in the windows. And here was I, with hunger, and the means to pay, or if I did not wish to pay, I had only to smash a window and take what I wanted. Nevertheless, it was hard to persuade oneself to do that. I was not yet ready to admit, after nearly 30 years of a reasonably right-respecting existence and law-abiding life, that things had changed in any fundamental way. There was, too, a feeling that as long as I remained my normal self, things might even yet in some inconceivable way return to their normal. Absurd it undoubtedly was. But I had a very strong sense that the moment I stove in one of those sheets of plate glass, I should leave the old order behind me forever. I should become a looter, a sacker, a low scavenger upon the dead body of the system that had nourished me. Such a foolish niceness of sensibility in a stricken world. And yet it still pleases me to remember that civilized usage did not slide off me at once, and that for a time at least I wandered along past displays which made my mouth water while my already obsolete conventions kept me
Let me
shop
get
in its
the Premier color
radiator
white.
and delicatessen. That made it seem different from doing my own breaking in. I climbed past the taxi and collected the makings
With the
of a good
Premier
meal.
color white, yeah.
But even then, something of the old standard still clung. I conscientiously left a fair price for what I had taken lying on the counter. Almost across the road there was a garden. It was the kind that had once been the graveyard of a vanished church. The old headstones had been taken up and set back against the surrounding brick wall, the clear space turfed over and laid out with gravelled paths. It looked pleasant under the freshly leafed trees, and to one of the seats there I took my lunch. The place was
Okay,
withdrawn and peaceful.
so now I got that done.
No one else came in.
I am going to use the crazy white again and go over it again.
I threw some crumbs to a few sparrows, the first birds I had seen that day, and felt all the better for watching their perky indifference to calamity. When I had finished eating, I lit a cigarette. While I sat there smoking it, wondering where I should go and what I should do, the quiet was broken by the sound of a piano played somewhere in the block of apartments that overlooked the garden. Presently a girl's voice began to sing. The song was Byron's ballad. So I will go no more a-roving so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving, and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself
Got
have
all
rest.
my hands.
Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet will go no more a-roving, like the light of the moon. I listened, looking up at the pattern of the tender young leaves and the branches made against the fresh blue sky. The song finished. The notes of the piano died away. Then
I
there was
didn't
a
rest
sound
my
of sobbing,
hands for a moment. It hurting too bad.
softly, helplessly, forlorn, heartbroken. Who she was, whether it was the singer or another weeping her hopes away, I do not know. But to listen longer was more I could endure. I went quietly back into the street, seeing it had only misted it for a while. Even Hyde Park Corner, when I reached it, was almost deserted. A few derelict cars and lorries stood about on the roads. Very little, it seemed, had gone out of control when it was in motion. One bus had run across the path and come to rest in the Green Park. A runaway horse with shafts still attached to it lay beside the artillery memorial against which it had cracked its skull. The only moving things were a few men, and a lesser number of women feeling their way carefully with hands and feet where there were railings, objectively outstretched arms where there were not. Also, and rather unexpectedly, there were one or two cats, apparently intact visually, and treating the whole situation with that self-possession common to cats. They had poor luck prowling through the eerie quietness. The sparrows were few, and the pigeons had vanished. Still magnetically drawn towards the old centre of things, I crossed in the direction of Piccadilly. I was just about to start along it when I noticed a sharp new sound, a steady tapping not far away, and coming closer. Looking up Park Lane, I discovered its source. A man, more neatly dressed than any other I had seen that morning, was walking rapidly towards me, hitting the wall beside him with a white stick. As he caught the sound of my steps, he stopped, listening alert.
Hello, what? I can't hear you. What you say?
All right.
Can you hand me a bigger plate? My cheese has spilled over.
Okay, hold on.
Hand me a bottle of water while you at that. We so cold. We didn't answer the phone, so she texted me. Ain't sharing. Is there any product you need stuff that I can send to you? And I said, run it back, tell her yes, money. And I broke her there. Yeah, she was gonna get all this and buy two gifts. Yeah, I was gonna buy this Christmas gift. That's why she asked. You know, I told her to buy yeah, give me the money. She told her we ain't got no way to go up here. And she's like, you can't go. She said, okay, then real for you.
Excuse that interruption. I was just gospeling with my sister.
I told him, come on. I felt relieved to see him. He was, so to speak, normally blind. His dark glasses were much less disturbing than the staring but useless eyes of the others. Stand still, then, he said. I've already been bumped into by God knows how many fools today. What the devil happened? Why is it so quiet? I know it isn't night. I can feel the sunlight. What's gone wrong with everything? I told him as much as I knew. When I had finished, he said nothing for almost a minute. Then he gave a short, bitter laugh. There's one thing, he said. They'll be needing all their damn patronage for themselves now. With that, he straightened up, a little defiantly. Thank you. Good luck, he said to me.
Now, I need to fill in his eyes. I'm using the Premier Color Black for his
The
eyes.
sound of his briskly confident tapping gradually died away behind me as I made my way up Piccadilly. There were more people to be seen now, and I walked among the scatter of stranded vehicles in the road. Out there I was much less disturbing to the people feeling their way along the fronts of the buildings. For every time they heard a step close by, they would stop and brace themselves against a possible collision. Such collisions were taking place every now and then all down the street, but there was one that I found significant. The subject of it had been groping along a shop front from opposite directions until they met at the pump. One was a young man in a well-cut suit, but wearing a tie obviously selected by touch alone. The other a woman who carried a small child. The child whined something inaudible. The young man had started to edge his way past the woman. He stopped abruptly. Wait a minute, he said. Can your child see? Yes, she said, but I can't. The young man turned. He put one finger on the plate glass window, pointing. Oh, Sonny, what's in there? He asked.
Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is
Go on, Mary, tell the gentleman. The mother
his
encouraged
hair.
her. Pretty ladies.
Do his hair next.
The man took the woman by the arm and felt his way to the next window. And what's in here? He asked again. Apples and things, the child told him. Fine, said the young man. He pulled off his shoe and hit the window a smart smack with the heel of it. He was inexperienced. The first blow did not do it, but the second did. The crash reverberated.
I'm gonna use my
up and down the
crazy
street.
art black.
He restored his shoe, put an arm cautiously through the broken window, and felt about until he found a couple of oranges. One he gave to the woman, and one to the child. He felt about again, found one for himself, and began to peel it. The woman fingered hers. But she began. What's the matter? Don't like oranges? He asked. But it isn't right, she said. We didn't know what to take them, not like this. How was you going to get food? He inquired. I suppose. Well, I don't know, she admitted doubtfully. Very well, that's the answer. Eat it up now. We'll go and find something more substantial. She still held the orange in her hand, head bent down as though she were looking at it. All the same. That seemed right, she said again,
We'll look closer
but
to
there was
me.
less conviction in her tone. Presently, she put the child down and began to peel the orange. Piccadilly Circus was the most populous place I had found so far. It seemed crowded after the rest, though there were probably less than 100 people there all told. Mostly they were wearing queer, ill-assorted clothes and were prowling restlessly around as though still semi-dazed. Occasionally a mishap would bring an outburst of profanity and futile rage. Rather alarming to hear because it was itself the product of fright and childish temper. But with one exception, there was little talk and little noise. It seemed as though their blindness had shut people into themselves. The exception had found himself a position out on one of the traffic islands. He was a tall, elderly, gaunt man with a bush could see them come in single file out of a side street into Shaftesbury Avenue and turn towards the circus. The second man had his hands on the shoulders of the leader, the third on his, and so on to the number of 25 or 30. At the conclusion of that song, somebody started "Beer, beer, glorious beer," pitching it in such a high key that it petered out in confusion. They trudged steadily on until they reached the center of the circus. Then the leader raised his voice. It was a considerable voice, with parade ground quality. Tony-ho! Everybody else in the circus was now struck motionless, all with their faces turned towards him, all trying to guess what was afoot.
Now we get the crazy art, white,
Mimicking the manner of a professional
and go
guide.
over it.
Here we are, gents, one and all, pick up bloody nilly circus, the center of the world, the other universe, where all the knobs have their wine, women, and soul. He was not blind. Far from it. His eyes were ranging round, taking stock as he spoke. His sight must have been saved by some such accident as mine. But he was pretty drunk, and so were the men behind him. And we'll have it too, he added. Next up, the one who Cappy Royal and all bricks on the house. Yes, but what about the women? Asked a voice. There was a laugh. "Oh, women, is that what you want?" said the leader. He stepped forward and caught a girl by the arm. She screamed as he dragged her towards the man who had spoken, but he took no notice of that.
Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is
It's a peach.
I'm gonna do his shirt and I'll use
And what about me? Said the next man. You, mate. What is he? I'm blonde or dark. Considered later, I suppose I behaved like a fool. My head was still full of standards and conventions that had ceased to apply. It did not occur to me that if there was to be any survive, anyone adopted by this gang would stand a far better chance than she would on her own. Fired with a
I'm
mixture
gonna
of
use this crazy art yellow. I don't know what kind of yellow it is, but it's like a light yellow. Cause he looked like he had cream shirt on, but I don't have cream, so I'm just gonna use this really, really bright yellow for his shirt.
When I next took an interest in things, I found myself lying in the road. The sound of the gang was diminishing into the distance, and the prophet of doom, restored to eloquence, was sending threatful bolts of damnation, hellfire, and a brimstone Gehenna hurtling after them. With a bit of sense knocked into me, I became thankful that the affair had not fallen out worse. Had the result been reversed, I could scarcely have escaped making myself responsible for the men he had been leading. After all, and whatever one might feel about his methods, he was the eyes of that party, and they'd be looking to him for food as well as the drink. And the women would go along too, on their own account.
Okay, so now I'm gonna do his lips.
And now I came to look around me.
He had pretty dark colored lips.
Any of the women hereabouts would
I
seriously
don't know,
mind
was he a smoker?
what with one thing and another.
His lips kind of look like my dad's lips. Like my dad's lips, the color.
They had been headed for the Cafe Royal.
And I don't believe he's trying to smoke his cigarettes. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the dark brown again. I'm gonna get the dark brown.
I think it was while I was sitting there comfortably with a brandy in front of me and a cigarette in my hand that I at last began to admit that what I had seen was all real and decisive. There would be no going back, ever. It was
I
finished.
can't seem to find my peach.
Perhaps it had
Okay,
needed
here it
that
is,
blow
my
to drive it
peach.
home.
Put down
Now
peach,
I
just the
came face to
Premier
face
color
with the fact
peach.
that my existence simply had no focus any longer. My way of life, my plans, ambitions, every expectation I had had,
That's
they
peach.
were all wiped out
Now I'm
as
gonna
a
use the
stroke,
Premier
along
color.
with the conditions that
Oh,
had
wrong
followed.
one.
I suppose that had I had
Dark
any
brown.
relatives or close attachments to mourn,
I'm gonna lightly
I
put.
should
I'm
have
not
felt
gonna
suicidally
press
damned
down
that
on
moment.
it. Just go over
But
it a
what,
couple
in the scheme
times
of
lightly.
times, a rather empty existence turned out now to be lucky. My mother and father were dead. My one attempt to marry had miscarried some years before, and there was no particular person dependent on me. And, curiously, what I found that I did feel, with a consciousness that it was against what I ought to be feeling, was release.
Now go get my crazy art white.
For it persisted.
Just blend it
I
out.
think it may have come from the sense of facing something quite fresh and new to me. All the old problems, the stale ones, both personal and general, had been solved by one mighty slash. Heaven alone knew as yet what others might arise.
Okay, so this is Carl Weathers,
But they would be new.
but I like to personally call
I was
him
emerging as my own
Apollo
master,
when he was on Rocky. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
I would no longer be shy.